In my last video, I explained the difference between soundness and validity, and I offered some shortcuts for determining whether an argument is valid. So recall that validity depends entirely on the logical structure of the argument and not on whether the premises are actually true. In this video, I want to talk about choosing premises to use in your arguments. So let's begin with a simple modus ponens argument. My chair is made of dry wood. If something is made of dry wood, then it is flammable. Therefore, my chair is flammable. Now that argument is valid. As far as I know, it is also sound. My chair really is made of dry wood. You can see it right here. Dry wood is indeed flammable, and therefore my chair is flammable. To assess whether these premises are true, we're trying to figure out whether it's sound, whether the argument's sound, you would most likely need to ask an engineer to evaluate what my chair is made of, and a chemist to explain to you why things that are made of wood are flammable. Now, when it comes to moral arguments, things aren't quite as clear-cut, because there's far more disagreement about the moral principles that you learned about 2 weeks ago than there is about the material composition or the flammability of my chair. If I know that utilitarianism is the correct moral theory, then I can use the principle of the utility as a premise in my argument. I can be sure that that argument is sound, as long as the other premises are true as well. But if I'm ambivalent about what the correct moral theory is, then I don't really know whether a valid argument that depends on the truth of utilitarianism is a sound argument. So there's two things to say about this. First thing I want to say is that you already have a tool in your toolkit for figuring out what moral theory you should endorse, and this tool is reflective equilibrium. And I would invite you to keep using reflective equilibrium and see if that continued process gets you any closer to the answer to the question, what is the correct moral theory? Even though you will not be able to complete your process of reflective equilibrium anytime soon, beginning it and engaging in it in earnest is going to mean that you are doing your best to make a sound argument, and that's really all that I can ask for here. Now, the second thing that I'm going to say about that is that in this class, I would encourage you to assume the truth of a moral theory and then just use it in an argument. So even if you're not convinced that Kant was correct about everything, you're welcome to use the formula of humanity in an argument anyway. And here's why. Every single one of the moral theories that you're learning about in class are candidates for correct moral theories. And they all have something really important to teach us. So at the very least, they can illuminate morally significant features of situations that we might otherwise have missed. So even if a theory turns out at the end of the day to be wrong, you can still learn about a situation by seeing what the theory would say about that situation. Now, all this has been incredibly abstract, so let's get concrete. Imagine that a marketing executive for a pharmaceutical company is considering launching a campaign that, though legal, is likely to mislead customers about the efficacy or safety of a new drug. So Immanuel Kant would say that the executive should not launch such a campaign because doing so would involve treating customers merely as a means of making profit rather than treating them as rational agents who are ends in themselves. Now, we can formalize this reasoning in a modus ponens argument. So premise one, if a proposed course of action involves using someone merely as a means and not treating the humanity in them as an end in themselves, then one should not engage in that course of action. Premise two, the executive's proposed marketing campaign involves using customers merely as a means and not seeing the humanity in them as ends in themselves. Conclusion, therefore, the executive should not engage in that marketing campaign. So that argument was valid. It was a modus ponens argument. Now, while an omnipotent being might be able to tell us whether the argument is sound, it's fine if you're agnostic about its soundness because you're agnostic about whether Kant's moral principles are objectively true. That being said, an argument based on a Kantian premise is still going to be illuminating, it can teach you something. Now, in this case, it helped us focus on the fact that the executive's conduct involved using customers as tools rather than respecting their rationality. Now, other moral theories are going to teach us other things about the situation, and replacing the Kantian premise with premises from those theories is going to be helpful for drawing that out. So a natural law theorist like St. Thomas Aquinas might have made the following argument. Premise 1, deceiving others is a perversion of language. Premise 2, the executive's course of action involves deceiving others. Premise 3, or conclusion, therefore, the executive's course of action involves a perversion of language. A utilitarian, on the other hand, might argue like this. Premise 1, if an action A in one's option set creates less net utility than some other action in an agent's option set, then the agent should not perform action A. Premise 2, manipulating customers to buy ineffective or unsafe drugs creates less net utility than not engaging in the manipulation. And conclusion, therefore, one should not manipulate others to buy unsafe or ineffective drugs. So let's conclude by talking about how to use thought experiments in arguments. Suppose that someone has just told you that it is always better to save more lives than to save fewer lives. Now, if you want to reject this claim, a good thing to do is to put it in a modus tollens argument and use a thought experiment to show that the consequent is false. Here's what that might look like. Premise 1. If it is always better to save more lives, then one should push a buff person off of a bridge to stop a runaway trolley that would otherwise kill 5 people. Premise 2. But one should not push a buff person off a bridge to stop a runaway trolley that would otherwise kill 5 people. Conclusion, therefore, it is not always better to save more lives. Now, when you're making arguments for this class, I would encourage you to use the thought experiments that we've studied or to modify them. So I just gave you an example of how to do that, how to use one that we studied. But for example, here's how you need to modify it. You might need to come up with a novel version of the trolley problem in order to critique a new moral principle that Judith Jarvis Thompson didn't talk about in an original paper. So maybe for some reason you're going to need to make it so the trolley is a self-driving car, or make it so that the trolley is making decisions based on learning algorithms. But if you're feeling ambitious, you're also welcome to create your own thought experiments and take them for a test drive. All right, so that's the end of my 3-video series on using reflective equilibrium, moral theories, and thought experiments in your arguments. I've covered a lot, so I would recommend taking some time to review them and make sure that you understand everything. Now, if you put the work in, you're going to have a really solid foundation for thinking carefully about ethics. So, good luck.